There are a ton of highly powered multicolor cards in Tarkir Dragonstorm. In recent episodes, we've discussed taking those highly, then fixing and removal, and then base color filler. But the quality of your base color filler will determine whether your deck is a winner or loser. It's important to know what cards not to play, or in what specific circumstances you can play poor performing commons and uncommons. And that's what we'll be covering in this episode of Mana Tutor MTG Draft.
So today we'll be using limitedgrades.com to go over the cards that are rated D or lower for most colors. But for red and black, we'll actually slip down to cards that are rated D minus or lower because black and red are so far the weakest colors in the format. And so there's just a lot of cards. And so to cut down a little bit, we'll go to the lower tier there. And we'll also be discussing kind of why these cards are not working in some cases, and in certain cases, what archetypes they may actually fit well into. So with that, let's dive into white first. So first up in white, we have Wayspeaker Bodyguard. It's a 3/4 for 3 colorless and 1 white. When this creature enters, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. It also has Flurry, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, tap target creature and opponent controls. So the real challenge with this card is that it's slow and that it's understated for what you're paying for. 4 for a 3/4. Returning a card from graveyard to hand is nice, but the mana value limitation on that means it's probably going to be a fairly weak card, and it has to be a permanent. So you can't even get like an Oshius Exhale or something like that that's really good back. And then the Flurry as well. It's a nice benefit, but overall it's just going to, tapping down a target creature for casting a second spell, not one of the better flurries. So overall, just not a great card for the value. It is a little bit better in red-white, just as a 2-color archetype, but overall, not great.
Yeah, I agree. I have played this in some of my white-red decks, and it's been okay. It's basically decent when you can get back a 2 mana value creature, and not so great otherwise. But still, I want my creatures to be kind of smaller, and then when they are bigger, like 4 mana plus, I do want them to be basically starting to be dragons at that point, right? I want a higher impact card at that point, which I think might be a little bit of what's reflecting the in Mardu. This is even worse because you do want, once you're Mardu, you're going to want to play other cards at the 4, 5, 6 mana slot. So, a card I play, it's okay, but I really only get it in as filler, and I try not to play it.
Right, absolutely.
Up next, we have Lightfoot Technique. For 1 and a white, you get an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying and indestructible until end of turn. Honestly, you're trying to go wide, not tall. This might kind of work a bit more in Abzan, where you care about the counters, but Abzan, I think we both agree, is one of the worst clans to be playing. Maybe over time, as Abzan becomes more, the rest of the decks maybe even out at week 3, week 4, this might go up a little bit. But you're not really looking for this in your white aggro-based decks. Yeah, it can be a bit of a finisher, but really you're looking to go, again, wide to finish rather than tall and flying over.
Yes. I actually see the best case for this card as a defensive removal spell against dragons. You can use it to, surprise your opponent, basically block their dragon, kill their dragon, and keep your creature alive in some cases. But even then, I think that's a very niche use for it. And like you said, it probably goes a little bit better in Abzan, where you want the counters and various triggers that occur because of counters. But other than that, yeah, there are better cards. There are better removal spells. There are better, counter-based spells as well. This just hasn't really found its spot. So next up, we have Loxodon Battle Priest. For 4 colorless and 1 white, you get a 3/5 Elephant Cleric. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. So once again, this is one of those cards that's probably a little bit better in Abzan as opposed to other archetypes. The problem with it is you have to have another creature out to put that counter on. You can't put it on itself, and so you're just paying 5 mana in that case for an understated 3/5 if you don't have other creatures on the board. And even if you do, it's pretty slow to ramp up and obviously vulnerable to removal. So like we were talking about with Wayspeaker Bodyguard, for your 5 mana drops, you're expecting more than this.
Yeah, agreed. Anything 4 or 5 mana also without really an enter the battlefield ability is tough to do. Up next, we have Starry Eyed Skyrider. For 2 and a white, you get a 1/3 flying creature. Whenever this creature attacks, another target creature you control gains flying until end of turn, and attacking tokens you control have flying. I have yet to play this card. I do have it a one of in my current Mardu deck because I wanted to try it out. And honestly, it's really just for the science. I don't really have a lot of faith in it. And the grade itself is kind of showing that. Again, at 3 mana, in your aggro white decks, you don't really want a 1/3, right?
Right.
You're looking for more than that. Yeah, it can cause something go flying, kind of like the Lightfoot technique, though we talked about. That isn't what matters. It's more about going wide. And so this doesn't really go with your plan in white.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things is that kind of limits it a little bit is when you're attacking with whether it's Mardu or sort of any mobilized base deck, you want to go wide. Your strategy isn't necessarily to evade your opponent; it's just to overwhelm your opponent with creatures. And so, giving attacking tokens you control flying, sure, that's nice, and it may help you get in that damage a little bit quicker. But at the end of the day, you'd much rather be spending your mana on something that's going to really affect the board a little bit more than this. And given the number of dragons and creatures with flying in this set in general, like giving that kind of evasion to your creatures on the offensive isn't always going to be super useful, because your opponent might still be able to block them. So next up, we have Tempest Hawk. For 2 colorless and 1 white, you get a 2/2 bird creature with flying. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a card named Tempest Hawk, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And a deck may have any number of cards named Tempest Hawk, which is irrelevant in draft, but obviously relevant for standard. Um, you know, this is just basically a Windrake that finds more Windrakes, which isn't necessarily bad. If you can get 8 copies of this in a deck and you get one out and you can just every turn be finding a new one, that could be a strategy, right? It's a form of card advantage, but the odds that you're going to get 8 of these are pretty slim. And if you're using 8 cards on Tempest Hawk in your 23 card
Right.
deck, basically, you're wasting a lot of opportunities to put in better cards. So I see this more or less as a Windrake, and Windrake's not a good card in in the modern format anymore.
Even when you play this card, you're not getting the card advantage until it can actually deal damage to your opponent. So it's not enter the battlefield. They can
Right,
respawn and kill it, and you don't. It literally was just a Windrake at that point.
right.
And yeah, it's echo what you said about just having slots for better cards than your deck. Interestingly, this does say be at red white. What I wonder, I think low stats and maybe particular players using this might be shifting that a bit. We'd have to dig a bit more into the data to see if that is the case. Um, maybe there's some possibility there. I have yet to play this card, and every time I've seen it on the battlefield against me, it hasn't been good. So I'm a bit skeptical that it's actually very useful in white red, but maybe there's something to look at there.
Yeah, and it being a 2/2, right? Like you said, it has to deal damage to a player. If they've got a 3/3 flyer, this card is useless, more or less. And if you can't deal with that 3/3 flyer, so yeah, I think it's just low stats. It's not gonna have the oomph you want it to have.
Up next, we have Poise Practitioner. For 2 and a white, you get a 2/3. It has Flurry. Whenever you cast your second spell, this each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, scry one. Again, at 3 mana in your white aggro decks, you really want to have the upfront rate of higher power, and you're really looking to go wide, not tall. This doesn't really have a slot in any deck, in my opinion, and the stats show that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats show it regardless. Obviously, I think its home is in Jeskai, where you are trying to trigger that flurry mechanic over and over. And I do think it, in theory, helps you do that, right? The Scry one allows you to kind of set up your next draw, make sure you're not drawing lands, make sure you're, able to keep the spells going. But the cost for it for the 2/3, it's not, it doesn't hit it. And it's the stats, I think, reflect that.
It's also the case that you really want to be playing this card on turn 3, and the flurry mechanic you can't really generate, turn 4 and onward a lot of the time. So, it's you get the benefit off of it more later when you want to be playing this card earlier. That hurts it as well.
Yeah, because a lot of times turn 4 and out, you've largely played out your hand. The fact, unless you've got two cost spells that you can double spell on turn 4, you're really not getting a lot out of that. All right, next up we have Erishin Sunshield. For 3 colorless and 1 white, you get a 3/4 creature. When this creature enters, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard, and you can pay 1 white and tap this creature to tap target creature. The exile mechanic, not super useful. I mean, obviously, if you've got somebody playing, if you're playing against a harmonized deck, yeah, you can sort of mess with their harmonize a little bit, but you're paying for an understated creature, and the fact that you have to pay a white and tap this to tap down something of your opponent's, sure, maybe you can tap down their big 6/6 and you're getting a little bit of an advantage out of that, but you'd much rather be using this creature for something. So just in that way, you're just paying too much for too little.
Yeah, usually also your tap target creature cards you want to have on lower powered things that get outscaled as the game goes. You don't really want to be tapping this just to tap down another creature when in white red, at least for your ground based creatures, this might be one of your bigger ones, right?
Right, right.
Up next, we have Dragonback Lancer. For 3 and a white, you get a 3/3 flyer with Mobilize 1. Again, a 4 mana card that doesn't have an ETB effect. Otherwise, this card looks reasonable. I have tried it in my white red and Mardu aggro, and yeah, it follows the same thing all the 4+ mana cards we've been talking about that are bad follow, in that you really want it to be something that's bigger, more impactful, or with a really good ETB ability. And as soon as I started playing this, I took it out in my later games when I saw it on the board.
Yeah, and I mean, the bottom line is there are better mobilized cards out there, right? This is a subpar mobilized card with so many dragons and other powerful flyers in the set. This is going to frequently get outclassed, and your opponent's going to block it, or it's going to be a priority for your opponent to remove, because if they can't block it in the air, they're not going to want to take 3 every turn, and so it's just going to get removaled, and it dies to most removal being a 3/3, right? So yeah, it's just it's not going to last long or do what you want it to do. So last up in white, we have Storm Beacon Blade. For 1 colorless and 1 white, you get an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +3/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, draw a card if you control 3 or more attacking creatures, and it has an equip cost of 2. In theory, this doesn't look bad on paper, right? You want this, in your sort of aggro decks maybe to, keep the card advantage flowing, to keep being able to cast spells. The problem with it is that whatever you attach it to is going to become a target, number one. You can't attach this to your tokens because the tokens aren't generated until your creatures attack, and equip is a sorcery. So you've got this card just has a number of problems with it that just don't really make it work. And I think the statistics, bear out that as an F, it doesn't work.
You don't want to be spending your mana this way in white. When something comes to target, now you have to equip it again for another 2. Again, you want to be going wide, not tall. And next, we'll go over the blue cards. But before we do, we've grown our subscriber count by 100 over the last 3 days, and we're on pace to hit our 1,000 subscriber count goal in this set. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do us a favor and hit that subscribe button down below. And back to the blue cards. Up next, we have Snowmelt Stag. For 3 and a blue, you get a 2/5 Vigilance. During your turn, it becomes a 5/2, and you can pay 7 mana to make it not be blocked this turn. In general, this looks like a pretty poor Magic card, and the stats bear that out. I will mention, in my control-based Jeskai decks, I actually started without this card and had drafted one, and I pulled it in because it is a decent finisher for those slow Jeskai decks that just need to kind of break through at the end. So I guess the stats do kind of bear that out as a C-. I wasn't quite sure, at the time if this was the right thing to do, but the way to win was just make something unblockable late game when I had so much mana out. That makes sense to me. This will be an okay, I'm not going to pick it highly. It's going to be one of my filler cards, but okay to play in Jeskai and basically nowhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think the one thing that this still suffers from, even in Jeskai, is it's well telegraphed. Your opponent knows it's coming, right? And if you spend that 7 mana to make it unblockable, you're probably tapping out at that point, and then all your opponent has to do is like a cheap removal spell that hits for 2, right? Twin Bolt, Ashes Exhale, and any number of the cheap removal spells take care of that at only 2 toughness, and so and then you've just spent 7 mana, and your opponent has spent 2, 1 or 2 maybe, to counter that ability, and that just feels bad.
Yeah, this sort of has the same problem as that one card from Aether Drift that was like pay 6, make it unblockable. It's just you're tapping out when you're doing it, and that is not an efficient way to use your mana. But hey, when it wins you the game,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
then it's good. But
Yeah, when it's one, then it kind of becomes a waiting game, like making sure that your opponent is out of cards in hand
yeah,
or whatever it is, so that they can't possibly deal with the threat, and you can deal the killing blow. And you can do that kind of in a control based deck most of the time, but at the same time, sometimes you're on a timer, right? So
yeah.
I think you kind of have to time this right in order to make it work. Next up, we have Agent of Kotis. For 1 colorless and a blue, you get a 2/1 with Renew. That for 3 colorless and 1 blue, to exile the card from your graveyard, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature, activate only as a sorcery. This is just a subpar 2 mana drop. The Renew is not bad, but it costs 4 to get 2+1/+1 counters. So you're basically paying 4 to add a couple counters to something. That's not efficient either. And the fact that you can only activate it as a sorcery, it makes it even worse, right? There's just better cards out there that do what you want this to do. Plus, in most of the in Teamer or in Jeskai, you're really not trying to do counters as much, right? Obviously, Abzan is sort of the counters based deck, so it feels like this doesn't really have the right niche anywhere, and it's just a little understated.
Yeah, there's other cards like the Teamer Devotee, for instance, that do the blue wants to be slow, right? So yeah, this is
Right.
a something that can maybe kind of slow down your opponent, but at 1 toughness, it's not surviving anything. Where like the Teamer Devotee could, and there's not really a place. It like you said, if I absolutely was struggling for 2 drops and I was in blue, I might consider playing this, but outside of that, no. Up next, we have High Spire Bellringer. For 2 and a blue, you get a 1/4 flying creature. The second spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast. Again, understated. A 1/4 for 3, you would like a little bit better than that. It also doesn't block great against a lot of the dragon flyers and stuff like that, so that's hurting it as well. And the upside of that second spell a turn, if you think about this, you play this turn 3, and then turn 5, you're likely to be able to double spell anyway, like with a 2 and a 3 if you wanted to. And the fact that it saved you 1, like, doesn't really matter. So it's just the benefit doesn't come up often enough to really make this worth it.
Yeah, and you have to cast 3 spells to basically make up for the cost of this, or double spell 3 times, right? To make up for the cost of this card. And it's not worth it. There are better cards to play. So next up, we have Ringing Strike Mastery. For 1 blue, you get an enchantment aura. When this aura enters, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step, and it allows them to pay 5 to untap the creature. It's cheap, and it allows you to potentially take out a big creature out of commission, but it doesn't remove the abilities from that creature. So if that creature has triggers, or has triggered abilities or activated abilities, like it still allows them to use that without necessarily being able to attack with the creature or block with the creature. And late game, they can just pay to untap it. And then notably, like if it's a vigilance creature, they'll pay once to untap it and never really have to pay to untap it again. And there's just better removal out there, right? There even blue has other removal spells that are just as good, right? Fresh Start comes to mind. The 2 cost flash that gives it -5, -0, and loses all abilities, right? That card's a B-. So it's obviously uncommon versus common, but like you can find better removal.
Even at common, there's Durgar Island Dragon, the Omen
Yes.
one that you can tap a creature, draw a card. Uh, Yeah, it only taps it once, but it replaces itself and comes with a dragon for the late game, right? Like you'll want other cards than this for this type of effect.
Yeah, definitely.
And last up in blue, we have Wingspan Stride. For blue, you get an enchant creature. It gets +1/+1. It has flying, and you can, for 3, return this aura to its owner's hand. I don't like auras. They can 2 for 1 you. Yeah, you can return it maybe in response, but then you have to keep 3 mana open for that, and it's not doing what blue wants to do. I don't really see a slot for this in any deck.
No, but I've actually seen a lot of people playing it, and I don't understand that. I've seen it. It's been played against me a couple times, and sure, I think I lost a game to this card once because they put it on a really high statted creature, and made it essentially unblockable for me because I didn't have reach and I didn't have a flyer. Okay, there will be cases where this card can win you the game, but most of the time it's just going to get you 2 for 1. So as we discussed with black and red, we're going to do only the D minus and lowers because there are so many of them at D and D minus. Starting up in black, we have Desperate Measures. For 1 black, you get an instant. Target creature gets +1/-1 until end of turn. When it dies under your control this turn, draw 2 cards. In theory, this looks appealing because you get to draw 2 cards, but you got to think you're really trading 2 for 2 at that point. You're trading the creature, you're trading this card to draw 2. If you can take out an opponent's creature, it might be worth it, but really you're just kind of wasting a card slot in your deck, and for a card that isn't going to have a lot of impact on the board.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by this, but after thinking it through, white black as base colors doesn't really have a home.
Yeah.
If you're playing white, you want to be playing white red. And in that deck, you can splash to be Mardu, right? But you really want to be heavy 2 colors with a very small splash. And this isn't enough to be one of your splash cards, right? So I think you run into mana issues with playing this in your deck. And because of that, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I think that the design for this was to cast it on a mobilized creature, right?
Right.
So you're not losing a card necessarily, you're losing a token, and that because it's going to die no matter what, even if they don't kill it on a block. So I think that was the theory behind it, but I think more often than not, you're not going to have that available, or like you said, you're going to run into mana issues, and it's not going to work the way you want it to work.
Up next, we have Worthy Cost. For a black, you get a sorcery with an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, exile target creature or planeswalker. You don't really want to be sacrificing your creatures unless you are doing the mobilize thing. You know, I'd say the same thing. I'm a little bit surprised in
Yeah.
that, for mobilize, this should look a little bit better. But I think you're running into mana issues. You don't really want to be splashing this color just for this effect. And so I think it performs poorly because of that.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that this does worse in Mardu Mobilize than it does in Abzan, right? Or at least stat wise, because in Abzan you're building tall and you don't want to sacrifice your creatures, whereas in Mardu you're mobilizing and they're going to die at the end of turn anyway. So I'm actually really surprised about the stats on this one. I actually I think I rated this card fairly highly, and I still like the theory of the card, but I think you're absolutely right. You're going to run into mana issues. I think part of this is I actually think this card will go up in value throughout the set as people kind of figure out mana bases a little bit better.
Yeah.
You really need to be thinking about your mana base when you're going into red white and then splashing black, like making sure you just have enough black sources to be able to cast spells like this, because on paper this is a really good card, like when you think about it, but in practice I think you're right that people are just it's getting stuck in people's hands.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much credence on the difference between the D and the D minuses, right? Like that's not
Right.
too far apart there. There's a aspect of how decks are performing in general to what the card is within that distribution of that deck as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, don't read into that too much, but I think you're right. Like removal is something that is possible to splash for.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to splash in decks that are more amenable to splashing multiple colors, right? So there might be a little bit of that going on with the green based
Green.
decks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you that I would play this card if I had enough black sources in Mardu. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Next up, we have Unburied Earthcarver. For 1 and a black, you get a 2/2, and you have the ability to pay 2, sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. You know, it's not a bad statted creature for a 2-drop. There are better, but really it's just largely a 2-drop that doesn't have much impact on the board beyond that. Now, again, I think the theory behind this is you can play this in mobilized decks, sacrifice the mobilized creature after it's dealt damage to put a counter on this, but then you're spending 2 mana, right? And you'd rather be spending that mana on something else. So I think that's really where this struggles is you don't have the mana to support doing this every turn. And even if you do, your opponent's just going to target it for removal.
I think this just kind of echoes don't play white black as a base. You don't want cheap black creatures. You can play Abzan with cheaper black creatures, but like we said, it's already the worst clan to play. And in that deck, you don't really want to be sacrificing creatures as much either. So it doesn't really have a home. Up next, we have Yathan Tombguard. For 2 and a black, you get a 2/3 menace. Whenever a creature you control with a counter on it deals damage to a player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Yeah, I think the difference in grades here, that's significant and shows you the difference here, right? Like, in general, people are putting this card in the wrong deck. You want to play this in your black-green deck, and that's the only place you want to play it. It is surprising that black-green-blue is an F, but I think the problem there is people must be playing blue-green base often enough and think they can get this card in as a splash that's good. And this is not what you want to be doing in blue-green. You want to be going multicolor good stuff and not trying to do counters. So I think it's people playing the decks wrong. But in green-black, yeah, I would play this and be pretty happy with it.
It's funny. At my most recent draft, I saw no less, at least 5 of these go around, which was, it was really funny. As an uncommon, you don't usually see 5 copies of a card among, the 3 packs, but I swear I saw at least 5 of these, and I passed it every time, even though I was, at least initially in my deck, had black in it originally. But it just wasn't, yeah, I mean, I just don't see it as that impressive. And at the end of the day, like, the creature has to deal combat damage to a player, has to have a counter, and sure, you're drawing a card, but you're also losing a life. So there's just limitations on how many times you can do that. And so I think there are better cards for your mana.
We said don't play black-white. The other option is black-green. We didn't say don't play black-green, but I still think black-green is one of the weaker decks right now, right? Like, this is a card I'd like to watch over time as the metagame smooths out, where black-green becomes more viable. But yeah, this is not a high pick and something I'm looking to avoid for now. Yeah.
So next up, we have Corroding Dragonstorm. For 1 colorless and 1 black, you get an enchantment. When it enters, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Surveil 2. And when a dragon you control enters, return this enchantment to its owner's hand. So this is one of the worst dragon storms. Sure, you get a nice life swing, and the surveil is nice to kind of help set up your draws a little bit, but it doesn't really impact the board state, right? If this had been like when this enchantment enters, target creature gets -2/-2 and surveil 2, it would honestly, in my mind, be a much better card.
Up next, Unrooted Ancestor, 2 and a black. You get a 3/2 with Flash. Pay 1 and sacrifice another creature. This creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. Black isn't performing all that great. You can maybe play this in your green-black deck. White-black, we said, don't try to do the sacrifice thing. It doesn't really work. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about this card. I'm not looking to play the decks that this would be in.
I mean, so this takes up a similar slot to what we normally see as a 4/2 for 4 with Flash in a lot of sets, right? Which is basically like you can play this on the defensive to kill something that your opponent attacks with and basically use it as a removal spell. it's interesting that this has that, it costs 3 instead, it has 3 power instead, and allows you to potentially have this survive, but it's still really a one-trick pony, and it deals with less because it has 3 power instead of 4. And I think that's really what's kind of holding it back, because usually that card it's usually in green, as in recent sets, but and it's usually a really good card, but this I think doesn't hit that mark because it's only a 3 power, and you have to have another creature to sacrifice. So it's like yeah, I don't know. It's not as good as the other versions of it. Next up, we have 100 Battle Veteran. For 3 colorless and a black, you get a 4/2 zombie warrior. As long as there are 3 or more different kinds of counters among creatures you control, this creature gets +2/+4. When you may cast this card from your graveyard. If you do, it enters with a finality counter on it. So again, in theory, card you can use twice, which is not bad. 4/2, it's got decent power, but you're just expecting more from your 4 drops than this, and you need, unless you can somehow engineer a deck where you've got those different kinds of counters, and there are plenty of cards that give trample counters, vigilance counters, in addition to +1/+1 counters. There's a few that give lifelink counters, but you got to find those. Otherwise, this is just a kind of subpar 4 drop.
Have you ever seen this be a 6/6 on the battlefield?
Not so far.
I
I
haven't
assume
either.
I assume someone can make it work, but again, it's really a supreme build around at that point, and to build around this, I think you're going to end up making a worse deck.
You don't want to pay 4 mana for a 4/2, and you especially don't want to do that twice. you know, so if you can make this a 6/6, great, but it's too hard to enable. And
Now, I
for
will
that
note,
reason,
when you play it from the graveyard, the finality counter counts towards the types of counters, right? But
sure.
you still have to have 2 more at that point, and then it's just vulnerable to removal. At which point, it's gone. It's exiled. So
This would be much more playable if it said 3 counters of any kind, like 2 +1/+1s count towards it or
right.
something like that. But 3 different kinds of counters, uh, it's tough. Up next, Alesha's Legacy. For 1 to black, you get target creature you control gains Death Touch and indestructible until end of turn. I don't really see much use case. A lot of times these type of abilities will give at least a +1/+1 counter, which would be helpful in black, or give some kind of like life link or something like that. This just does the Death Touch and indestructible. I haven't found a slot for this in my deck.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one. I think it suffers from the idea that this is probably best used in a mobilized deck where you're, attacking with lots of tokens, and your opponent's like, well, I'll block that 1/1 token with my 6/6, flying dragon, or whatever, and then you could, use this as a combat trick to kill the dragon. But it runs into the same problem that we've talked about with mana bases, right? Where it's black, and you're usually splashing black, or you want to be splashing black, because there's not a lot of mobilized, there's not a lot you gain from black in those decks. And so if you don't have the mana to cast it, it's not useful. And so that's really where I think the problem lies with this. Next up, we have Cruel Truths. For 3 colorless and 1 black, you get an instant, surveil 2, draw 2, you lose 2 life. 4 mana to draw 2 cards is not great. Usually you see that on something costing 3. The Surveil 2 beforehand is nice because you kind of get to set that up, but then you're losing 2 life, which is just, it's too much for too little.
Yeah, there's much better card draw in this set than this too, right? Like, why would you be playing this? You'd only be playing this in Abzan, which we already said is one of the weaker ones. You'd be looking to get your card advantage elsewhere. Last up in black, we have Delta Bloodflies. For 1 to black, you get a 1/2 flyer. Whenever this creature attacks, if you control a creature with a counter on it, each opponent loses 1 life. Getting a 1/2 flyer for 2 is understated. You really want to have more power. And yeah, it's great that you can make your opponent lose a life, but you have to have a creature with a counter on it, and they can just kill that creature, which is probably more powerful anyway. And then this gets understated as well. So it's just too weak of a card in general.
Yeah, or they can just block this and kill it. And sure, they've lost 1 life from the trigger of this, but they're not losing life from the attack. So you know, this, it doesn't get a lot done. So next up, in red, we have Devoted Duelist. For 1 colorless and 1 red. You get a 2/1 Goblin Monk with haste and flurry. So whenever you cast your second spell each turn, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. the haste is nice if you can get this out turn 2 and get a little bit of damage in with it, but the bottom line is with 1 toughness, it dies to basically anything, and so by the time you can use its flurry, it's probably dead already, and the flurry ability is honestly not that impressive.
Yeah, I'm looking to play almost any 2-drop over this in my white-red aggro decks. If you absolutely do get choked on 2s, I have put this in a deck, I think. But other than that, no.
Yeah, and if you're playing Jeskai, you're probably like Jeskai Flurry, you're probably playing a more controlling style, and so this just I'd rather play something else on my 2-drop than this. I mean, sure, it's not a terrible blocker. It can kill a couple of things, but yeah, it's just there's better cards.
Up next, Wild Ride. For a red, you get a sorcery with target creature gets +3/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. It has Harmonize for 5. These kind of tricks are usually best when they at least save your creature. Like this doesn't even save your creature. Yeah, it's nice you can do it twice, but you don't really want to be tapping down your creatures using Harmonize in order to play this if you're going to be aggro to begin with. And so it just doesn't really have a good slot.
Yeah, I'd say that the best use case for this is, when if you want to play a super aggro mobilized deck and you want to be able to play a mobilized creature like a 3-drop on turn 4 and then also attack with it, right? I think the best use case for this is playing like a Dalkovin Pack Beasts, the 04 that mobilizes 3 for 3 mana. And then you have 1 mana left. You play this. It's now a 3/4 with mobilize 3, and you can attack with it on turn 4, plus whatever else you have on the board. So if you have like a super aggro mobilized deck, maybe. But aggro, as I think we've talked about in previous videos, the aggro in this set it's not a fast set, and so sure you might be able to like put together the perfect aggro red white, and if you can, then this might have a spot in it. But I still think there are better cards.
And I do want to be clear when you say aggro isn't as prevalent in this set, you mean that going extremely fast without it's the initial setup that the red white decks do of going wide, right? So aggro
Right.
is still a thing. It can go out fast, but
Yes.
it's more about playing wide and then being able to tack in for the win than it is
Yes.
necessarily going extremely fast per se.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the odds that you're killing your opponent on turn 4 or 5 very low in this set. I mean, even again, I'm sure you could craft a perfect scenario, but it's slower than previous sets where that has been a very real possibility, right?
Yeah.
So next up, we have Breaching Dragonstorm for 4 colorless and 1 red. You get an enchantment. When it enters, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast it without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is 8 or less. If you don't, put that card into your hand. And when a dragon you control enters, return this enchantment to its owner's hand. Right. So the obvious problem with this card is you're paying 5 to essentially get a kind of semi cascade effect. But at you may hit a one cost card. It might be an instant that's a combat trick. There's any number of things that when you cast this, maybe you're just not hitting the right card. I will say I have played this card. I played this in a deck that trophied, and I think the best use case for this card is a deck where you have 8+ dragons. If you can play a slow deck that has 8+ dragons, where you can not always but fairly reliably hit a dragon when you play this, it's actually very good. But that's the only niche case for it.
You would need a lot of those omen cards, right? Because they can
Yes.
play as the
Yes.
cheaper card, but they would come into play as the more expensive card here. Yeah, I guess that would be the place for it. I have yet to play this, and I don't see myself playing this in the format, but I could see the case if you get a lot of omens to consider this card. I will say I got beat by this card really bad. Guess what card they hit off of this? Elspeth.
Right. Right.
They hit Elspeth off of this. And I'm like, okay, I think I insta conceded at that point. But like the times this will hurt you occasionally, and the other 95% of the time is likely to not.
Right. And I think that, I see the best fit for this card as a, essentially a 5-color dragon deck. If you can pull together a 5-color dragon deck with a lot of those Omen dragons, this is not a bad card because you'll play it, you'll hit a dragon, it'll immediately come back to your hand. You'll play it next turn, maybe hit another dragon, it'll immediately come back to your hand, right? That's the best use case, though. But most of the time, you're going to hit something you don't really care about, and otherwise. And so that's why I think this card is a very niche card. Again, I played it in a deck that trophied. I think I had like 7 dragons in that deck, though, and I think that's why it did well. It was a teamer deck primarily. I think I might have splashed white in it as well for a couple of dragons, but like that's the best case for this card. Otherwise, it's just not good.
Up next, we have Seize Opportunity. For 2 and a red, you get an instant. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your turn. You may play those cards, or up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+1 until end of turn. Ultimately, a 3 mana draw 2 maybe, like, if you can play them both, is not very good. And then giving 2 creatures +2/+1, it's not really what you're looking to do. I get the design kind of helps you with the card advantage or with the go wide effect, but both sides of this are a bit underwhelming, and therefore I don't really look to play this card.
Yeah, I think for me the best case. I know the +2/+1, but the best case is the ability to use this to flurry, right? But the problem is, what if you hit 2 lands? Like then you're just like, okay, I'm not going to get to use that to cast a double spell, and that'll happen a fair amount of the time. So yeah, I mean, you've just basically spent 3 mana to maybe get another land drop, but you were going to draw those cards anyway. Next up, we have Summit Intimidator. For 3 colorless and a red, you get a 4/3 reach creature, and when it enters, target creature can't block this turn. Again, understated. The reach is nice. It may kill some dragons, but overall, there are just better cards. I think I actually have used this to win a game,
Yeah.
from preventing my opponent from blocking. That's a rare niche case. It's going to come up only once in a while.
If you go into a draft deciding you want to play white red and you're picking like the cheap white red creatures first and you don't end up with enough top end, then I can see playing this. Like, it's a viable top end card to help your white red deck win the game.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me that Mardu specifically is worse because your top end should be better if you're splashing, right? Like, so the way I like to draft this set is to go for the powerful cards first, and so I will have that top end, and I won't have a need for this card. But I do see with the styles of some other drafters, you could possibly get into this card and have it make your deck. Up next, we have Reverberating Summons. For 1 red, you get an enchantment. At the beginning of each combat, if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, this becomes a 3/3 creature with haste in addition to its other types. And you can play 1 red, discard your hand, sacrifice it, draw 2 cards. I have seen this in a turbo Jeskai deck beat me and be actually pretty impressive. But
Same.
I think that they just got lucky in how their spells came on out. The fact that you also saw it makes me think maybe there's more to this than I was thinking. I thought they just got lucky, but it's possible, small sample size, that we saw 2 decks get lucky against us. Curious on your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, your ideal play for this is turn 4, right? You play this turn 4, you have another 2-cost spell in your hand, you immediately turn it into a 3/3 and attack with it. And then, once you run out of cards, maybe you sacrifice it to continue getting cards to continue doing your double spelling, right? That said, I think that when I lost to it, it was just because honestly I had a bad hand.
Okay.
Right, and I didn't have enough. That was about the best use case for it, though, right? But if I'd had a better hand and I had a blocker for it, it's pretty useless. So yeah, I don't think it's actually that good. I think sure there are times where it'll win you a game, but there's times where basically any card can win you the game if your opponent has a bad draw and you've got an okay one. But pound for pound, this card is not going to be worth it 90% of the time in a deck, 95% of the time. So up next in green, there are no cards at the D range, so we're starting once again with the D minus. First up, we have Rain Veil Rejuvenator for 3 colorless and a green. When this creature, you get a 2/4 that when this creature enters, you may mill 3 cards, and you can tap it to add an amount of green mana equal to this creature's power. I actually like this card a fair amount for a little bit of ramp. It's a little weak in the power toughness, but if you can even just put like one counter on it through like another spell, it's actually pretty potent for your ability to ramp and pay high cost spells on turn 5. Like you could potentially play something that costs 7 or even 8 on turn 5 under the right circumstances with this card. So I don't hate it, but there are also just better cards.
We've had some comments talking about ramp on our channel, and in general, I've said I don't like ramp, but I like fixing, right? So when something ramps and fixes you, like encroaching Dragonstorm, the green Dragonstorm, that one I like specifically when you're trying to fix for a 4 color, 5 color deck, whatever. Um, and so this doesn't give you the fixing, right? This just gives
Yeah.
you the ramp. It is interesting in your Sultai deck that this is a D. Maybe there is a point to adding some counters on this and really ramping. I haven't done that yet, but mid format, it might be something I might try based upon what you said. I am intrigued by this card, but until those decks become more viable, I'm not that interested.
Yeah, I will say in terms of the fixing, right? Obviously, this card doesn't fix itself, but I have used this card before in combination with a devotee, and you
Oh,
can essentially get different colors. But as you said, that's relying on the devotee. That's not relying on this card necessarily.
yeah, and you can only do the devotees once per turn, so like
Right.
yeah, it's an interesting fixer, but you can kind of fix it with your lands as well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, bottom line is if you have a lot of high cost spells, and your mana base can support it, this might help you ramp to get those high cost spells out. But
yeah.
beyond that, it's got limited usefulness.
Up next, we have another ramp card, Roamer's Routine. For 2 and a green, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. It does have Harmonize. Again, I don't like ramp. I like fixing. This does fix you. It's viable to play this in the decks that need that, which is, I think, why Teamer is doing so well there with it, because it wants to be playing more colors. That said, I do prefer to get my fixing elsewhere, like the Encroaching Dragonstorm we talked about, that can get you 2 and ramp you a bit more, or even the mana rock, the Dragonstone or whatever. That's 3 mana ramp you that permanently leaves add 1 mana of any color and get to some +1/+1 counters down the line on dragons. So I don't see too much of a slot for this. If you happen to get it and you need it to reach your mana requirements, play it. Otherwise, don't.
Right. And like you were saying, Dragon Brood's Relic is a B minus, right? So, that card, much better card for, cost, effectiveness. Encroaching Dragonstorm's a C. There's better fixing out there than this. If you absolutely need it, yeah, sure. But, you know, you're gonna find better cards. Next up, we have Crotique Nest Guard. For 2 colorless and a green, you get a 4/4 Defender, and you can pay 3 to have it attack as though it didn't have Defender. It's just too much to have to pay to make a like a 4/4 that can attack. Like you've got better uses for your mana. You can find similar power toughness creatures for similar costs. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about this card. It's just kind of bad.
Yeah, why couldn't they have given this reach to like compete with the dragons or something like that? But
Right. There are any number of things that they could have just given a little bit to it that would have made it a much better card, but it's bad.
up next, Heritage Reclamation. For 1 and a green, you can destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard, draw a card. There's not reliably enough artifacts or enchantments to destroy to make this worth mainboarding. You could consider sideboarding this. Yes, it has the buyout of the exile card to draw a card, but now it's just replacing itself to maybe get a Harmonize or a new card out of the graveyard. Not worth a slot in your deck.
And last up in green, we have Rite of Renewal. For 3 colorless and a green, you get a sorcery to return 2 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then target player shuffles up to 4 target cards from their graveyard into their library. Exile Rite of Renewal. Getting two permanents back from graveyard for 1 card, and then potentially being able to shuffle 4 more cards into your deck. Paper not bad. It's just for a 4 cost card, it's kind of a by itself does nothing. Sure, it might give you future plays, but you're more or less going to be spending a turn playing this, and your opponent's going to know what you're bringing back, and prepare accordingly. So it just doesn't do it. It ends up not doing a lot.
Yeah, I'd only consider playing this with bombs that I really want to get back, but honestly, I'd rather just basically be playing more bombs.
Right.
There's enough bombs in the set that you don't need to get them back and waste a turn to do that.
Right. Now, if you've got some like bombs that have incredible ETB effects, I could see, maybe playing a copy of this if you as like your 40th card, but I wouldn't prioritize it highly. I'd prioritize almost anything else over it.
Moving on to the multicolor cards, we have Defibrillating Current for 2 Brid in Mardu. You get a sorcery with it deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain 2 life. So this is kind of interesting. I do think that the Mardu colors are interested in clearing the way with some removal. There's better, cheaper removal out there. At costing 3, that would be a fine rate for this, but the problem again is you're now splashing for the removal, the same thing that we said before of this archetype. Yeah, you don't care about the life gain really, unless you're racing. So, ultimately there's better cards to be taken here for cheaper mana.
Yeah, the one thing I will note that I think helps this a little bit is that there's a lot of removal in black, and you don't want to necessarily, if you're playing a pure red white, you can still play this card.
Yeah.
It's less efficient, obviously, but it gets you access to more removal that you may not be able to play if you decide to not play black. So I think that's, to me, the best use case for this card is if I'm just playing a pure red white and I'm a little short on removal, this card's fine. It's not
Yep.
great. It's 4 for 4, which is a pretty bad rate for removal. But it does have that bonus of a little bit of extra life gain. It helps you race a little bit. It does target planeswalkers, so this is one of those. And there's only, I think Elspeth might be the only planeswalker. No, there's Ugin, right, as a planeswalker. But so there's that benefit as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a subpar removal. Next up, we have Monastery Messenger, another hybrid, 3 cost. This one in Jeskai. You get a 2/3 flying vigilance. When it enters, you can put 1 target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard on top of your library. Again, just it's slightly understated, especially if you have to play it for 4, or even 5. Especially I would never play this for 5, but the vigilance is nice, the ability to attack and maybe save it as a blocker for something small, and the ability to get back and basically in more or less more times than not an instant or sorcery, um, isn't bad, but it doesn't really fit super well with the theme of Jeskai, right? Which is flurry. It doesn't have flurry itself. Sure, it lets you choose your next draw basically, but in the end, like, you're trying to cast 2 spells, right? If it was like put it back into your hand,
Yeah.
it would be much better, right? But for what it does, it's just kind of help setting up a draw a little bit. It's not worth it.
Yeah, these 2 Brid cards that in order for them to be effective, you really want to cast them on turn 3 aren't that great because you're not going to get the right mana to cast it on turn 3 reliably enough. And even if you do on this card, you
Yeah,
must have on turn 2 basically played an instant or sorcery spell that you want to get back at that cost, right? Um,
yeah,
so it's just a tough card for your 3 mana slot.
yeah. And most of the cheap instants and sorceries that are really good are omens, and those are getting shuffled back into your deck. So there's just it just doesn't work.
Up next, we have Effortless Master for 2 blue-red. You get a 4/3 Vigilance Menace. This creature enters with 2+1/+1 counters on it if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. Um, I have yet to actually play this card myself, but I actually am a little surprised on how low this is. I
Yeah,
feel like a 4/3 Vigilance Menace for 4 on its own would be good enough. Now, Jeskai uh, doesn't necessarily need cards like this. It will do dragons and bigger type of thing late game, and early game be drawing or be removing things and also drawing cards later. And Teamer, I kind of feel the same thing. You can get your power elsewhere. So this might suffer from the 4 mana slot, and you want to be doing other things, and then your bigger cards be have them more powerful later. But I would have expected this to be in the C range, to be honest. So a little surprised.
Yeah, I will say I got absolutely wrecked by this card one time, and the case that wrecked me was they had the blue creature that when you cast your second spell, you may copy it and exile with suspend the original, right? And so they got two effortless masters, right? Where the suspend was equal to and then like 4 turns later they got another one for free and they'd already cast another spell, and so they got 2/6/5s out of it. Like, if you can pull off the right combo with this, it's really good. But and I agree with you. I think it's a fine statted card for what it is. So I am a little surprised it's so low. I think part of that might just be that people have not really figured out what to do with Jeskai. Because I think when we talked about our set preview, we talked about how, like, the weird thing is that red white's usually trying to be aggro, but in this case, you're playing one of the slowest archetypes, and so you one of the slowest clans, right? So you have to kind of like figure out how to do that. Like the difference between what you're normally trying to do with red white and then what you're trying to do with Jeskai is very different.
Yeah, Jeskai might be a good like archetype deep dive for us for a later episode.
Yeah, agreed. So next up, we have Jeskai Brushmaster for colorless and blue, red, white. You get a 2/4 double strike with prowess. Again, on paper,
Same
probably
thing.
not a bad card, but the thing is, you're having to. There's no flexibility in how you cast this, so you have to have the right mana base to do it, and I think that's largely what's holding this card back.
I also am surprised that this is a D minus. I would have also expected this to be in the C range. I think it's a decent blocker when you get this thing down in Jeskai for your slower Jeskai decks, and then, once you're able to kind of help clear the way and cast a bunch of spells, this becomes a double striker that pumps up a decent amount. There may be a bit of people not getting Jeskai, right? Like we just mentioned. I don't know. Maybe I'm too high on some of these Jeskai cards compared to the stats, so would be a good one to dig into a bit more.
Yeah.
Here's one I'm not surprised about. Hardened Tactician, 1 white-black for a 2/4, pay 1, sacrifice a token, draw a card. Basically, don't play black-white as your base colors, and even when you try to splash this, you don't care about sacrificing the tokens. So this doesn't go in any deck, in my opinion, that you want to be playing.
Yeah, I would largely agree with that. I do think if you can get the right splash with black and you have enough sources, this can be a pretty powerful card draw engine for an aggressive mobilized deck. But there are better cards generally, right? I think that I wouldn't mind playing this in the exact right deck, but I think building that exact right deck is with that has the enough mobilized sources for this to be useful, the right mana base for making sure that you can play this when you need to play it, and yeah, I think it's more trouble than it's worth, and most of the time it's gonna just not be useful. I think I've played a copy of this in one deck, and every time I drew it, I never actually used the activated ability.
Here's one I'm not necessarily surprised about, but I think what might be a mover up later in the meta. So, Stalwart Successor, 1 black-green, you get a 3/2 with Menace. Whenever one or more counters are put on a creature, if it's the first time counters have been putting on the creature this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Uh, Decent rate. We kind of mentioned you don't want to be playing black-green base, which this is where it goes. I will say I did play a deck that had this and the enchantment that allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on all your creatures at end of turn every turn, and so all my creatures got 2 +1/+1 counters every turn. That was really good.
Right. Yeah, I
um,
think that's the key to this card being good is you need to have many ways to enable +1/+1 counters.
yeah.
Or not even +1/+1, but counters in general.
Yeah, it does seem like this might be viable. Like the Abzan deck is your counters deck, so it's viable there. Again, try to avoid Abzan for now, and as the meta evolves, that's probably more viable down the line.
Next up, we have a card that I am actually surprised this is where it's
Me
at.
too.
I mean, I guess I'm not surprised given the color of it, but just the usefulness of the ability on the card. So we have Bone Cairn Butcher for one colorless. You get and a red, a white, and a black. You get a 4/4 with Mobilize 2 and attacking tokens you control have Death Touch. Again, I think on paper this is a good card, but it suffers from a lot of the potential with splashing. That said, by turn 4, it's more likely you'll have a black source. So I do feel like this is lower than this card should be.
I agree.
Definitely played this in a Mardu deck and it did well, but yeah, I mean, I can understand. Mardu hasn't been doing, I think, as well overall in the um, rankings as some of like certainly not as good as Teamer, but yeah,
I'm not so sure that piece is true. Mardu is a pretty good deck, and like so. For example, the Mardu Monument is one of the best uncommons in
yes,
the set.
yes, true,
Um, so I think it's less that and more this archetype needs you to be white red based. I think a lot of people are trying to build white black based decks and it's just not working out as well.
right,
And you need good mana to support splashing this. And I think enough people are not building good mana bases that it's bringing down the stats. Um, it'd be interesting to check top players on this.
yeah,
Let's go ahead and do that. Bone Karen Butcher top players is still a D plus. Yeah, I mean maybe it really is like maybe you want to be splashing black less often than I'm willing to.
right,
It throws off your mana base enough, and it probably does also suffer from again your bigger cards. You want to have more impact. To me, this kind of is impactful enough that I
yeah.
like
I think
playing
this
it.
is I think this is a good 4 drop on paper, but it's just not. It's not bringing in the stats that you would expect. I think, which is an interesting one. I'm interested to see how this one goes throughout the set. Because I do think like it is a decent card on paper.
And last up in the multicolor cards, we have Reputable Merchant with a Abzan 2 Brid cost. You get a 2/2. When this creature enters or dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It's a hard to cast 3 drop, which we already said those aren't typically good. And it just is at rate at a 3/3 when you do so. And yes, when it dies, it puts a +1/+1 counter on something, but dies effects are not nearly as good as like enter the battlefield effects, right? And so all that combined makes this a not very playable card.
Yeah, agreed. So first up in artifacts, we have Abzan Monument, which, like all the other monuments, costs 2. When it enters, you get to search for a basic land of the color type. So in this case, plain, swamp, or forest. And this monument has the ability to pay 1, a white, a black, and a green, and tap it to sacrifice it, and you get an XX white spirit creature, where X is the greatest toughness among creatures you control. You can only activate that as a sorcery. Abzan, as we've kind of talked about, is one of the kind of weaker clans. So I think that's why this is not surprisingly the weakest of the monuments. It's actually I don't think it's a bad monument. Like if you've got a 4/4 or a 5/5 out, being able to get a land, fix your mana base a little bit early on, and then sacrifice this later on to get a 4/4 or a 5/5 token, which 4/4 is at rate for what you're paying, but you're essentially getting a free card out of it. It's not bad, but I think it's just really suffering that because Abzan is not a particularly great deck.
The way the stats are here kind of shows you that. It's a D overall, meaning amongst the distribution of all decks, it's low because Abzan's performing low. But when you limit that distribution to Abzan specifically, it's a C plus. So it's good in the Abzan deck, but Abzan deck isn't good. I will also say that the XX piece I do think is harder than a lot of the other ones. Like Teamer, you just get a 5/5, right? Right. So this because you're often going to have just maybe a 3/3 out of this or something. That also makes it a little tougher. Up next, we have Embermouth Sentinel for 2 colorless. You get a 2/1. When it enters, search your library for a basic land card, uh, reveal it, shuffle, put it on top. And if you control a dragon, put that card onto the battlefield tapped instead. This card is just a little too underpowered, a 2/1 for 2. The distribution of the stats here, the different decks, makes a lot of sense to me. The Mardu deck, or really red-white decks, are the only deck that really cares about getting a creature onto the battlefield early, other than being for defensive, right? So this will get a creature onto the battlefield early and allow you to kind of fix yourself. It doesn't draw you it, which hurts a lot, but it does let you put maybe your single black source that you needed to get, for example, in red-white onto the top of your deck and let you draw that. But you need to want that land and want the fixing, basically, and add to the board. So yes, I'll play this when I'm desperate for the fixing, especially in my white-red decks. But other than that, I'm not looking to play it.
Right, and I think this adds to the fact that when what we just said about Mardu Monument being one of the best monuments, right? Mardu Monument's just an objectively better card than this, even though yes, this gets you a creature immediately, whereas Mardu Monument doesn't. But Mardu Monument puts the land in your hand, so you can continue to draw more gas to feed your aggressive deck, and then down the line, Mardu Monument gives you a wide board, whereas this doesn't do that. So I think that's, I agree with you that I think Mardu is the best use case for this, but even then, I'd much rather have Mardu Monument.
For sure.
All right, and then last up today in our artifacts, and last up in our review of bad cards, we have Boulderborn Dragon. For 5 colorless, you get a 3/3 flying vigilance artifact creature, and whenever it attacks, surveil 1. Understated, not impressive in terms of its abilities to impact the board. I have played this a couple of times. I played this actually in my teamer deck where I had 7 dragons, right? Because it was a dragon. I've also played this in another teamer deck where I had the uncommon 1 cost blue card that lets you pull this, specifically this card or the Dragonstorm orb, from your deck and put it in your hand. And it actually worked okay in those circumstances. But beyond that, it's not. There are better cards.
Right. I've played even 2 copies of the dragon when I had Dragonstorm Forecaster,
Yes.
just to be able to multiple times get a Boulderborn Dragon. That combo, that little mini game, is good. If you haven't tried it, you should try it. I don't know that I'd play more than 1 Dragonstorm Forecaster in my deck, but it's a good early defender that draws you some cards. It is unfortunate that Boulderborn Dragon itself is not that powerful card. So typically these cards that have synergy to let you get less powerful cards aren't great, but and it's not amazing. But if you refuse to do it, I think it's wrong, right? Like it's something you should consider doing in your base blue decks to stall out the early game and draw more cards.
Yeah, and I've definitely had Dragonstorm Forecaster, played it turn 1, activated it turn 2, played Dragonstorm Globe turn 3, right? Like that sort of works, right? If you're not under immediate pressure from your opponent, which sometimes you are, and that doesn't work. But notably, you can still use this as a blocker and activate its ability, right? It's not activated as a sorcery, which is nice. And like I'm talking about Dragonstorm Forecaster, that is. And so you can use that to fish either the globe or the Boulderborn Dragon, and then use it later on. So it is nice in that it does give you a bit of card advantage if you have that combo. But I would not recommend just putting Boulderborn Dragon in there in your deck without any other synergy with that Boulderborn Dragon. Right? It's great. It's potentially good if you have the Dragon Storms, and then potentially good if you can fish for this card with your Dragonstorm Forecaster.
Yep.
But beyond that, not great.
That's all for our review of the worst cards. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments below what card takes you agree with or disagree with. And next time, we're thinking of walking through an example draft or possibly even pairing up together on a live draft. So thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
See you in the next one.